Summer day, 1941. The Swiss Alps. George de Mestral and his Irish pointer hiking through alpine meadows. The sun is shining. The wildflowers are blooming. His dog is running ahead, chasing butterflies, living his best life. Then they get home. George looks down at his pants. Covered. Absolutely covered in burrs. Dozens of them. Those annoying seed pods that latch onto fabric and refuse to let go. He looks at his dog. Even worse, the poor animal's fur is matted with burrs from head to tail. Most people would curse, spend 20 minutes pulling them off, and move on with their day. But George de Mestral is not most people. Instead of getting angry, George gets curious. Why do these burrs stick so well? How can something so small grip so tightly? And, most importantly, can I recreate this? George de Mestral doesn't know it yet, but that annoying dog walk is about to launch an 8-year obsession. He'll spend nearly a decade trying to mimic a weed. People will think he's insane. His colleagues will laugh at him. And he'll end up inventing one of the most revolutionary fasteners in human history, used everywhere from children's shoes to NASA spacesuits. This is the story of the man who looked at an annoying plant and saw the future. The inventor who turned a dog walk disaster into a billion-dollar industry. And the fastener that changed everything, without a single button, zipper, or knot. The boy who saw solutions everywhere. George de Mestral was born in 1907 in Lausanne, Switzerland. From childhood, he saw problems as puzzles waiting to be solved. At age 12 years old, George patented his first invention, a toy airplane. Not a model kit, an actual working design that he'd built from scratch. His father, an agricultural engineer, encouraged this curiosity. His mother taught him patience, and young George learned that the best inventions came from observation, watching how things worked and asking, "Can I make this better?" As an adult, George became an electrical engineer. He worked for various companies, designing machinery and industrial systems. He was successful, respected, comfortable. But George was also a passionate outdoorsman. He loved hiking in the Alps, hunting, exploring nature with his dog. And on one particular hunting trip in 1941, nature taught him something he'd never forget. George and his Irish pointer had spent the day hiking through mountain meadows. It was late summer, burr season. Burdock plants were everywhere, their seed pods ready to latch onto anything that brushed past them. By the time George got home, his wool pants were covered in burrs. His dog's fur looked like a fuzzy minefield. Removing them was tedious, painful, and took forever. But instead of just cursing the burrs and moving on, George did something different. He took one to his microscope. Under magnification, the burr revealed its secret. Tiny hooks, hundreds of them, covered its surface. Each hook was curved like a question mark, perfectly designed to latch onto loops in fabric and fur. It was brilliant, simple, elegant. Nature's own fastening system. No adhesive, no threading, no complicated mechanisms. Just hooks and loops. And George thought, what if I could make a fabric that fastens like a burr? It seemed like a simple idea. It would take him 8 years to make it work. 8 years of failure. In 1941, when George started his obsession with hooks and loops, World War II was raging across Europe. Switzerland remained neutral, but the world was in chaos. George could have focused on wartime engineering, safer projects, practical work. Instead, he spent every spare moment trying to recreate a weed. The first problem, what material could hold hooks that small? George tried everything: wool, cotton, synthetic fibers. Nothing worked. The hooks either broke, bent, or fell apart after a few uses. Textile manufacturers told him it was impossible. You can't make hooks that small, they said. The fabric will tear. It'll never be strong enough for practical use. But George didn't give up. He kept experimenting, testing, failing, and trying again. Then, in the late 1940s, George discovered a breakthrough material: Nylon, a new synthetic fabric invented just before the war. Nylon was strong, flexible, and could be shaped under heat. George realized that if he could weave nylon into tiny loops on one side and cut them to create hooks on the other, he might have his burr-inspired fastener. There was just one problem. No one knew how to manufacture it. George approached textile manufacturers across Europe. He showed them his idea. He explained the hooks and loops. He demonstrated how it would work. They all said the same thing. "This is ridiculous. It'll never work. Even if it did, who would buy it?" George spent years being rejected. He invested his own money, thousands of francs, into prototypes that didn't work. His colleagues thought he'd lost his mind. His family worried he was wasting his career chasing an impossible dream. But George had seen those burrs under the microscope. He knew it was possible. Nature had already done it. He just had to figure out how. Finally, in 1952, George found a weaver in France willing to try. Together they developed a loom that could create the hook and loop fabric George had envisioned. The first samples were crude. The hooks were uneven. The loops tore easily. But it worked. It actually worked. You could press the two pieces together and they'd cling. You could pull them apart and hear that distinctive ripping sound. You could fasten and unfasten them hundreds of times without wearing them out. George had done it. He'd recreated the burr. After 8 years, he'd turned an annoying plant into a revolutionary fastener. Now he just had to convince the world it mattered. Velcro is born. In 1955, George de Mestral patented his invention. He named it Velcro, a combination of two French words, velour, velvet, and crochet, hook. He founded Velcro Industries and began manufacturing the fastener in Switzerland. Initial production was slow. Each square foot of Velcro took hours to make, and convincing people to use it, even harder. Fashion designers dismissed it as ugly. "Who wants ripping sounds on their clothes?" they said. Traditional button and zipper manufacturers saw it as a gimmick. But George found unlikely allies, industries that needed fast, reliable fasteners in extreme conditions. The ski industry adopted Velcro for boot closures. Divers used it for wetsuits. Mountain climbers fastened gear with it. And then came the moment that changed everything. NASA. In the 1960s, when America was racing to put a man on the moon, NASA engineers faced a critical problem. How do you fasten things in zero gravity? Buttons require precise finger movements, difficult in bulky space gloves. Zippers can jam in extreme temperatures. Laces float around untied. But Velcro? Press and stick. Pull and release. Simple. Reliable. Perfect. NASA started using Velcro on spacesuits, equipment bags, and interior surfaces where astronauts needed to secure tools. When Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin walked on the moon in July 1969, they were wearing Velcro. The fastener inspired by a dog walk in the Swiss Alps had just been to the moon. After NASA's endorsement, Velcro exploded in popularity. By the 1970s, it was everywhere. Children's shoes, medical braces, blood pressure cuffs, wallets, bags. Parents loved it because toddlers could fasten their own shoes. Doctors loved it because elderly patients with arthritis could manage it more easily than buttons. Athletes loved it because it stayed secure during intense movement. Today, Velcro Industries sells over 60 million yards of hook and loop fasteners every year. George's invention is used in virtually every industry imaginable, from automotive to aerospace, fashion to medical devices. The man behind the rip. George de Mestral lived to see his invention become ubiquitous. He watched it go from a rejected idea to an essential part of daily life. But George always remained humble. When asked about his success, he credited the burr, not himself. "I only copied nature," he'd say. "The burr had already solved the problem. I just noticed it." That's the key to accidental invention. Observation. Most people look at annoyances and just feel annoyed. George looked at annoyances and asked questions. George died in 1990 in Switzerland at age 82. By then, Velcro was a household name, so common that most people didn't even realize it was a brand name. not a generic term. In fact, Velcro is like Kleenex or Band-Aid, a brand so successful it became synonymous with the product itself. The company still fights to protect its trademark, reminding people it's hook-and-loop fastener, not just Velcro. But George wouldn't have minded. He didn't invent Velcro for fame or ego. He invented it because a burr annoyed him, and he was curious enough to figure out why. The next time you fasten your shoes, secure a bag, or hear that distinctive ripping sound, remember, you're using an invention inspired by an annoying weed and a patient dog. George de Mestral turned 8 years of failure into a global revolution. He proved that nature's simplest solutions are often the best, and he showed that sometimes the most transformative ideas come from the most irritating moments. If George's story inspired you, let us know in the comments. What everyday annoyance do you think could inspire the next big invention? And subscribe to Backstory Frames for more incredible stories of the real people behind accidental inventions. Thanks for watching.